I'm so excited to be here. Thank you to all the organizers. This is actually my first trip to Warsaw, my first trip to Poland. But actually, I grew up hearing about Warsaw. These fine folks that you see up here, this is my family. My Mima and Peepaw, as we call grandparents in the south of the United States. And the handsome guy with the collar, that's my dad, at age 13. This is in 1972, when my grandparents came to Poland for my grandfather to study mathematics, so same on the Copernicus theme, at the Polish Institute of Sciences. So they had a bit of a tough time when they were here. The person who rented them their apartment defected about a week after they got here. So every Polish tutor they got was followed by black cars. Needless to say, they didn't learn a whole lot in terms of Polish. I'm excited to say the only black cars I've seen so far are Ubers, so I think this is a good trend. I'm coming from a changing world in the United States. Of course, that's no news to anyone here. Our newly inaugurated 45th president, Donald Trump, on the second day of his presidency, announced that he was in a running war with the media in a speech at the CIA. That was news to us. We don't consider ourselves to be at war with any person, any politician. But it's caused us to really talk about and think about what we're doing. This is an administration that puts forward alternative facts. We have a different term for that. We call those things untruths. So for me, being in the unit that I am at CNN, we're concerned with getting it right. We're in just a different landscape now. This administration has attacked our reporters individually. This is one of our White House correspondents, as well as another Washington correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. So we're working in a new environment now in the United States. This is the unit that I'm a part of, and if we do our job properly, you never hear about us. So my unit at CNN is called The Row, and what we do is we vet our scripts. We work with our reporters from Beijing to Tokyo to Tel Aviv. We've got a reporter right now in Pyongyang at the moment, and we make sure that the storytelling works. We make sure that we're not missing any perspectives that we should be covering. We make sure that we're not going to get sued. Or if we do get sued, we make sure that we're going to win. And we also make sure that every detail, down to the last one, is right. Because when it comes to credibility, even if you nail the big story, if you get one detail wrong, that hurts your credibility, right? I mean, if you read a story that has everything right, but it had the weather wrong, for instance, you may not trust the whole story. So every detail matters. Including decorating details, as it turns out. So what happens when a new president is inaugurated is they get to choose how to decorate their Oval Office. So Trump changed the drapes, literally. Mr. Trump chose some golden curtains that hung during the presidency of FDR in the United States. And a Washington correspondent, a White House correspondent by the name of Zeke Miller, who works for Time, got a tour of this redesign of the Oval Office on Inauguration Day. So he tweeted at 6:21 this observation. It's a small detail. Winston Churchill bust is back in the Oval Office, he tweeted. 6:21, small detail. Another journalist said, hey, wait a minute, there used to be a bust of Martin Luther King Jr. in the White House, in the Oval Office. Is it still there? Zeke hadn't seen it, and so then this reporter made an assumption that this bust was now gone from the Oval Office. It's a small detail, right? I mean, it's a peaceful transfer of power in the United States. This is a small piece of art. And less than an hour later, Zeke realized that his observation had morphed into something that wasn't true. People were reporting that this MLK bust was taken from the Oval Office. Not true. So Zeke realized what was going on. He tweeted, correction, the MLK bust is still in the Oval Office. It was obscured by an agent and a door. That's why he didn't see it. There was a back and forth with the new press secretary, Sean Spicer. Sean Spicer said, apology accepted. It's a kumbaya moment, small detail. fixed, right? Well, this has proven to be something that the administration has brought up continuously, saying, you know what, this is an example of journalists getting things wrong. This is why you can't trust journalists. And so for those of us who care about being in the business of the truth, we have to care about every little detail because it matters, right? This matters for our credibility. So it's hard, thinking about things big and small. As we saw, this is one example of where someone got it wrong when they were in the room. What about when you're looking at news from social media, right? Because journalism is changing, get used to it. Facebook Live launched a year ago, less than a year ago. It launched in April. And already at CNN, we've done probably a half dozen stories based exclusively on Facebook Live. Things that came in, someone broadcast themselves live, and we said, oh, that's a big story. So this one is the most recent example. It's kind of a peculiarity of American law. You know that in a lot of states in the United States, you can walk around with guns as a private citizen, wherever you are, right? So in Michigan, you can walk around with a gun. So this guy had on a ski mask and this big gun. Police asked him some questions, and he said, wait a minute, don't harass me just because I'm walking around with a ski mask and a gun. That's my constitutional right. So he strapped on his GoPro, put it on Facebook Live, walked into a local police station looking like this. Can you imagine? And police said, put down the gun, what are you doing? And this whole thing was live, right? So for us at CNN, when we said, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to broadcast something that's a hoax, right? How do we know this is real? This one was pretty easy. We called up the police station, the local police station in Dearborn, Michigan. They said, oh yeah, we arrested those guys. They failed to follow commands when we told them to put down the guns. So with that one, okay, we saw the video on Facebook Live, we called the police, we got it confirmed. We went to air with that one pretty quickly, right? Some of them have been a little bit more challenging. This is a really tough story and sort of a tough photo, so I apologize for that. This was a big story last year. The guy whose arm that you see there is Philando Castile, who was shot and killed by police in Minnesota. And when he was shot and killed during a traffic stop, his partner, who was in the car with him, her first instinct was to put this on Facebook Live. Now at CNN, we have a bunch of different tools like CrowdTangle that tell us when a Facebook profile that normally doesn't get a lot of traffic suddenly has a spike in traffic. So then we look at it and we say, hey, wait a second, what is happening here, right? So we looked at this video and we said, wow, this is obviously something very serious has happened here. We called local police. Local police said, well, we know that an officer shot someone tonight, but we haven't seen the video yet. We're still investigating. But the community was pretty small, just a small community in Minnesota. And the time that police told us there was an officer-involved shooting matched with the time that this video was put on Facebook. So we said, you know what? This is looking pretty good. The other thing that gave us confidence was when we looked at the woman's profile who had streamed this. It was a really normal profile. It was set up a long time ago. She was clearly from this area. She had checked in different places. So there was nothing in her profile that said, hey, wait a minute, let's put on the brakes here. Maybe something else is happening here. But sometimes we look at someone's social media profile and we say, ooh, maybe we want to take a pause on this one. So this is a story. This guy tweeted that he had gotten kicked off a plane going from London to New York for speaking Arabic. He posted a video. We watched the video. The video it showed him getting kicked off the plane, but it didn't really show why he got kicked off the plane. You can see it did really well on social media, right? So we're like, wow, what's the story here? Reached out to Delta. Delta says, yeah, we're looking into it. But then we looked at this guy's account and we saw, actually, this guy is kind of a hoaxer. He's like a prankster. And so we said, oh, that's a social media account that we say, maybe there's something else happening. So when we talk about media trust and verification, sometimes the best thing that you can do is to say what you know and to also say what you don't know. Because in this case, we knew this guy had gotten kicked off a plane. We knew that there was some controversy about it. both in terms of our own work and showing our work in terms of transparency, which helps build trust with the audience, we said, hey, look, here's what we know, and here's what we don't know. And actually, with this story, we still don't fully understand exactly why this guy was kicked off a plane. I started at CNN in 2008, and actually one of the first things I did when I started was we had a mandatory Twitter class at CNN, which at the time I thought was kind of funny. And there was a big debate about, how do we handle content that is produced by people who aren't journalists? And journalists were kind of nervous about that, right? Because, we've had training and, This is one of the first stories where journalists were really beaten to the punch, right? This is Miracle on the Hudson. And this tweet was from a Latvian American, and this was the first picture of that incredible event. So we're in a completely different world now, and I mean, it changes minute by minute, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's social or whether you're in the room or whether you're talking to a source that doesn't want to be named. We ask the same questions of all of these sources. We want to know who they are. Or if it's on social media, we want to know, how do we know they are who they say they are? How do they know what they say they know? You've seen a lot of reporting, where it's somebody who's not named, right? And in that instance especially, we want to know, were they briefed on the plan that they're telling us about? Did they overhear it secondhand? We want to know for sure that they know what they're talking about, right? We want to know, have they been reliable in the past? Because if someone's telling us stuff that's turning out not to be true, we're not going to use them again. What's their motivation? That's a key component, especially if we're talking about somebody who doesn't want to be named, right? And there's a lot of times that people don't want to be named for various reasons. But then it's critical to know, why are they telling us what they're telling us? Does what they're saying make sense? Now, sometimes it might not make sense, right? That's a really big story if somebody's telling us something that doesn't make sense. But we still want to ask ourselves that question. We want to get a second source, and if possible, we want to get a third source. There are problems when you have one source. Not always, but sometimes. And this one, what's a PowerPoint presentation without Santa Claus, right? This is a story that was a problem because of one source. So this is a story that a lot of media outlets went with in the United States, CNN included, and it was a tearjerker story following a contentious American election, right? Santa Claus gets a call. I mean, look at this guy. This is a mall Santa, but he looks like the real thing, right? So he gets a call. There's a kid who's sick and dying, and he wants to see Santa Claus before he goes. So this Santa goes on TV and he cries, retelling the story. The kid dies in his arms. The only problem was there was no second source on this. When we started asking, okay, can you give us the name of the family? When we started calling the local officials and saying, did you have anyone die at this hospital at that time? They couldn't say yes. So this guy stands behind his story, but the important thing is that we couldn't get a second source. And what journalism is about is finding what's true, not finding what you want to be true, not finding what someone else wants to be true. It's finding what's true, which means you have to ask tough questions, including sometimes of Santa Claus, and including on Twitter of our newly elected president, Mr. Trump. And I mean, that's what journalism is. We're not about trying to be liked. We're going to ask questions that are going to make people uncomfortable. And if we're doing that, then we're doing our job. We're trying to figure out what's true. This is a graph that doesn't make me really happy. In the United States, we've had a declining trend in terms of when people are asked, do they trust the media? I mean, this is not 32% of people. We've got a problem, right? So I think, this is something that I worry a lot about, and I think for anybody who's in the business of trying to figure out what's true, you need to be worried about this. I think in terms of showing our work, being transparent, clickbait headlines, right? They work for a one-off, but over time, people are saying, what the hell? That article didn't live up to the headline, right? So some of this stuff is self-inflicted. Some of this stuff, journalists and media companies really need to look at and say, you know what? What can we be doing to better build trust with our audience? Transparency is a huge one. So that statue story I was telling you about, the story about the bust that turned out to not be right. This is how Time magazine handled that story. And they just put it all out there. They said, here's what happened, here's what went wrong, and they wanted to tell their audience, you know what, we screwed up. But here's how it happened, and try to build back that trust. Because, I mean, as everybody knows, once trust is lost, it's very hard to rebuild. So, we've talked a lot about swimming in information. Digital natives are actually not as savvy as you'd think about figuring out what's true and what's not. This is a picture from Fukushima Daiichi that Stanford researchers used to ask teenagers recently to figure out how teenagers evaluate news. And they asked teenagers, hey, does this picture tell you something substantive about the current conditions, the environmental conditions at Fukushima Daiichi? 40% of the kids that they surveyed said, yes, this picture tells me something substantive about that environment there. And so when we're thinking about the role that we can play in terms of adding value to consumers, some of it is taking information like this, because this is information, right? And saying, here's actually what's useful about this, and here's what's not. Is this a normal mutation in daisies, for instance? Who took the picture? What's the rest of the environment look like? And, you know, it's not just pictures, right? I mean, there's just volumes of information out there. I was in a debate with a friend the other day who really doesn't trust mainstream journalists. I mean, he likes me okay, I guess, but he doesn't really trust mainstream journalism. And we were debating this bill that was up. And he said, you know what? I don't even know what's in the bill. People are going to vote on the bill and they don't know what's in the bill. Actually, in the United States, if a bill is up for consideration, anyone can find it online. And that's true of a lot of information these days. But finding information is quite different than understanding it, right? And so when we're talking about building trust, that's something that journalists can really do, is dive into the stuff that nobody else wants to read, and then tell people what's really going on there. And the good news in the United States is that people are reacting. I mean, people are starting to really value information that is presented with transparency. You know where it's coming from. You know what the journalists are about. New York Times, Atlantic, ProPublica, Washington Post, all of these publications have seen their subscriptions go up. Because, of course, in the United States, we have a market-based media model. So subscriptions need to go up in order for those publications to continue doing what they're doing. So that's what I've got. I think this is a really important project, as everybody has underlined. You know, free flow of information, people getting the information they need to make the decisions about their lives, right? I mean, like, this is critical stuff. So I'm really excited to talk to you all on our app or over coffee and hear about what's happening in all of your worlds. Thank you so much.